The Smithsonian Faculty Fellowship Program represents a rewarding academic professional development opportunity for faculty at Montgomery College. The fellowships are a product of a unique collaboration between Montgomery College and the Smithsonian Center for Learning and Digital Access. It's the first of its kind between the Smithsonian Institution and a community college.
Natalie Thomas holds a BS in elementary education, an MED in reading instruction, and extensive coursework in special education transitional services. She retired in 2012 after 37 years of service for Montgomery County Public Schools, MCPS, and began teaching developmental reading classes at Montgomery College in Germantown. She has experience teaching education classes at Washington Adventist University and Towson University. Natalie is active in Montgomery County Human Rights Committees and Citizen Advisory Boards in partnership with MCPS. She is the mother of a May 2016 graduate of MC. In her free time, she enjoys reading and designing and creating jewelry. She enjoys traveling and learning about different cultures. She is currently writing a book on the history of her childhood neighborhood that was a successful experiment in racial equality in the 1950s.
My goal was to get them to think about reading. Reading is thinking. You will see a couple little quotes that I get. I tell them that all the time. Please think, please think. So I just want to tell you how I embarked on this. Just like Alan, I wound up going down to, I said, oh, this is my opportunity, I'm going to do this. And I went down to the Museum of American History, National Museum of American History, before I wrote my proposal to see the exhibit to make sure I knew, because it had opened up over the summer of 2015. And I had gone down around about the Smithsonian when they have the folk festival, and then went down and was able to see the bicycle being ridden through the museum and all those good things. And I said, okay, how can I use this with my students? And I decided I was going to have them read. Okay, so with the developmental reading course, my students have to be able to read a text and identify the main idea of a text. They need to be able to infer meaning from what they read. They have to be able to recognize and understand vocabulary in order to understand. Again, if they come to you, they got to know how to do this. And above all, really, the main thing that they have to know is why they're reading text. And I teach them, don't hold on to every word. You're reading for a purpose. Make sure you know why you are reading this. So my project really focused on improving critical thinking skills in order for them to understand the main idea and to find the supporting details that would lead to them in understanding the text that they read. Through this, I had them blog. I set up Blackboard, and they had to blog once a week from October to the end of the semester. And then they had to have a final field trip project. Okay, now the other piece I need to let you know about my class, we all know that Montgomery College is a very diverse college, which is excellent. Many of the students in my class of 22 students had never been to a museum. Almost all of them, I think for the exception of 2, had never ridden the metro. And they were petrified. So based on that, we then started. The very first thing I decided to do, I said, how can I make this relevant to them? And they always have to read a book in my class. So I chose the book River Crossed My Heart. And I chose this book because, one, it lends itself to students being able to go to the museum and look at all of the artifacts that were innovative, inventions, things that made life better for people and made life better for us today. So I chose this book, one, because it took the years that it took place in. And the second reason was it takes place in Washington, D.C., in Georgetown during the 1920s. So this was a historical fiction book And a lot of the facts that are in this book were real history. So the students had no idea that the story, or that Georgetown historically was African American back in the 20s. It was an African American neighborhood, and there was an awful lot of segregation and things like that. And yes, it brought us directly to the current events, because we wound up with current events going on too. So in order to introduce the topic, we had to work with some vocabulary: what was innovation, what was invention, and what is culture. What are these three words, and how does it relate to the student? Then I had them read the first 2 chapters in the book, and then they worked in small groups. We did a lot of small group work because, again, I needed to make sure that they could bounce ideas off of each other, that they could question each other. And we wound up, when we had a group of students coming in who didn't even know each other, by the time we left, we had a family. We literally had a family. They did a critical thinking activity in small groups where they were given pictures. And I'm not going to, you guys might actually get to do this activity, but I gave them pictures of actual patented inventions. And I just gave each group of 4, they were in groups of 3 to 4 students, and they were given the pictures, and they had to look at them in terms of, what is this? What was it invented for? Why was it invented? What made you say that that's what it is? And the picture on the left here is directly related to the book. I won't tell you how, but it's a chair. But then we had to talk about the attributes of the chair and why it was so important. Now, again, they read the first 2 chapters in the book. It's about a family in Georgetown who had migrated from North Carolina, the South, to Washington, D.C. And the child in the story, one of the children in the story, drowns in the first chapter of the book. She drowns swimming in the Potomac River. She's 8 years old. Okay, we'll leave that with you. So all these inventions had something to do with the book. Then the very first activity, the very first area of comprehension that we work on in reading is main idea. So I set up on the Learning Lab, I set up a collection of objects. And the actual activity was, I'd like you to look at these objects and make groups and give them a main idea or a title. But as you are looking at making these groups, you need to make sure you can relate them in some way. And I'm not going to show you all of them now, but one of the actual groups that I got, there are other pictures on here where we have an actual motion picture camera. We have the script of The Wizard of Oz. We have the ruby slippers. We have the scarecrow costume. And then there was a picture of a migrant mother and her children. It's a very famous photograph that has been published. And one of my students, and many of the students in my class, have no idea of American history as well because they have come from other countries, and so they don't have the background. And one of my students said to me, I put all of those pictures, I put all of those objects together in a collection, and the main idea is life during the Depression. Well, I was like, oh my gosh. So I said, can you explain this to me and explain it to the class? He said, yes. He said, well, when you look at a lot of these, and he could have put more in there. He wanted to put in the lunch pail that's there, and then there's a miner's cap also in the collection. He said, but you know, the woman with the 2 children is hurting, and her 2 children are hungry. I mean, he had really interpreted this picture just based on what he was looking at. And he said, and then when you figure out when The Wizard of Oz was actually filmed, he said they needed some entertainment. he had pulled this together. So I'm in critical thinking, yeah, we were getting there. We were really getting there. So this was the first activity, and I have, for this new group, the new scholars, this would be your time to try the different things you want to try. Try it with this group, the classes that you have now. So I did it with that group of kids, and so I did it that way. Oh, here we go. Now, in order to know what you read, you have to read to get into material. And for us as professors, they have to write. The students have to write to get out. That's usually what we do as readers anyway. And again, reading is thinking. So they started reading the book, and I told them before we actually got really started in the semester that we were going to take a field trip down to the Smithsonian, and I wanted them, as they were reading, to be thinking about the things that that were relevant to the story. They had to understand the culture of the people in Georgetown during the 1920s. They had to identify the historical implications in the book. There were many. And they had to relate any of the innovations, any of the inventions that were in this book that they could find at a museum, because they were using other collections and other information from the site, and related to their lives today. Then we started writing. They were reading and they were writing, and they had to complete double entry journals. Now, if you know anything about developmental students, they don't like to write. They don't like to read, they don't like to write. So to make this as interesting and to get them to really think, I wanted them to be able to go into text and reflect on what they had read. And so they were doing this through the reading of the book and using other information from the actual website. So when we moved into the blogs, we went from the double entry journals into the blogs, and I gave them a rubric to follow. So everything they did after the initial double reflection journals that were also on Blackboard, they then had to start blogging, and we moved, the writing actually began to increase, and I was actually expecting to get better. You'll see that I give them what a blog is. So we talked about that. So then, now they're getting into more text. They're still reading the book, and now they're going to use the website. This will take you out to the Smithsonian's site, and here you are at the National Museum of American History. This is where it got very interesting. Now again, remember, this is my developmental class. The assignment was choose one item, and relate it to the reading of the book. Well, let me tell you that one item wound up into 15. They didn't want to stop writing. They didn't want to stop reading. And they began to come out of this site and then just connected all of the articles that they were reading in this particular site, Object Project, and related to the reading of the book. So now we have gone completely over to another side. And then they said to me, Professor, please stop telling us what chapters to read. Can we just go ahead and read the book? That's the first time that has ever happened to me. I'm teaching a class. That's the first. Now we're getting ready for the field trip, because now we've had all the discussion, and you'll see one of my students here, that they had, from the Object Project, there was a whole link on bicycles. And they used that as part of transportation, what was going on back in Georgetown during the reading of the story. And they got around by bicycles, they got around by horse and buggy, was a car or two. A lot of them had carts. And so the students then began to relate what they were reading. Now, at this point, they are now wanting to go and get to the museum. So I said to them, okay, we're going to go down, and I wanted to get them into the Museum of African American History and Culture. They really wanted to go there. And I said, and I really want you to go to the American History Museum. So I got tickets for him to the African History and Culture Museum. So we went down on a Friday afternoon. Best time to go. Nobody was there. And it was a beautiful day. It was October, the end of October. It was just wonderful. I told them you can bring your family members, you can bring your children, and we had a crew to go down to the Smithsonian. And you will see here that one of the comments, I never thought I would have that much fun at a museum. Some of them were like, museums are boring. They had said that. The fact that they had never been to the museums in DC and then they were going to go back. I had one student who actually said to me as we were leaving, I'm coming back tomorrow. She went back the next day. Okay. Another comment was that my mother and I are going back to the National Museum of American History. What had happened, they were to go down to get on Metro by 9 so they could be at the National Museum of American History by 10 o'clock when it opened. And then they were to meet me at the fountain at the African American Museum at 11:30 because we had 11:45 tickets. Well, they got into the American History Museum, did their little thing in there, and said, oh, we got to come back because we have to meet the professor. This was the best experience ever. Here we go. Before they went to the museum, I figured they didn't really know how to visit a museum. And so what I had done the semester before is I had actually developed a scavenger hunt, and the students went down with their families on a Sunday afternoon and they went through the museum using my scavenger hunt. And I have copies if you'd like to have one today just to see what you can do. And I used the feedback from the scavenger hunt to determine how I was going to get my students ready to go down. And so on the Smithsonian website, you will find this activity here. And the students, the college students, as elementary as it looks, these college students literally enjoy taking this questionnaire and then reading about what kind of learner they would be in a museum. I highly recommend it. Then I gave them their project. The project was that they had to become a curator of a museum. They had to build a museum. They could work in pairs or they could work alone. But in the museum, you had to have at least 5 artifacts or objects, and you had to relate it to the reading of the book, River Crossed My Heart. And these are the directions here. So now they've given a purpose. They're actually given a purpose of what they're going to do when they get down to that museum. So they now have their paper, their pencils, they are ready to go. I also told them, have your cameras ready, take pictures, just collect, just have fun. And then they began to do it. I have a trifold right here that's Sarah will put up. This was an exhibit one of my students, 2 students made. Okay, and they took pictures when they were there, and then they placed them on a trifold. I have some other things here, okay? Here, I had to get them ready. So I said to them, riding the Metro can be fun, but it's no small feat. You know, you got to get the smart card, you got to know what you're doing, working those machines. So I said, okay, we're going down on the 30th, whatever day it was. Go to the Metro, go to Shady Grove Metro the weekend before. Buy your smart card. I told them how much money they needed to put on their smart card. I asked them how many didn't have the funds to do it. We were going to work that out with my department chair. We had everything. Everybody had their smart card and were ready to go. When I met with them that Wednesday, they had to show me their smart card. And you'll see here that Tracy showed me how to purchase my fare card, and we all headed downtown to the museums. There was one person who had not gotten her smart card, and she had to do it that day, but she was scared to death. I also went to the website and got all the information that they needed to have for the African American Museum because they couldn't have tripods, so they couldn't take selfies with a tripod. There were some real rules. And that sheet right there is only the first page because then I went ahead, they wanted to eat. When we're going to eat lunch, that's what they want to do. And so I said, well, you can eat, you can buy food from the wagons and vendors outside. No, we want to eat in the museum because we heard the food is good. I said, and it's also expensive. No, we're going to save our money. So I gave them the actual menu that they could choose from. The National Museum of American History felt like I had stepped into a history book without ever reading it. That shows up a lot. The fact that I had students who were not born in this country and the fact that both of the museums helped them understand American history was a real boon. And they went back, a lot of the kids went back and told their families what they had learned. And then we finally all met up when we realized there were 2 fountains. And I had to put, we're all here, yay. That's my quote. And then they proceeded to go, if you know anything about the African American Museum, you start at the low level and you work your way through. Now you're going to see what actually happens with the students. At this point, this is where we were getting ready to get on the elevator that would take us down to the bottom of the museum. This quote right here was a quote that a student said to me as we were leaving the museum. I also need to let you know that when he was telling me this, and he also wrote it in his project, he wrote it with tears in his eyes. I mean, he said it with tears in his eyes. He looked at me and then he hugged me. My personal feelings about the museum are very sad and emotional. Being a white person and knowing that my people started that mess made me feel very uncomfortable, but I pushed on. As I got to the 1900s, everything started to become more and more emotional. By the end of the museum, it made me realize that all those names I saw on the walls, right here, today would be very disappointed with how the government and others continue to add on to discrimination, almost as if their efforts, deaths, and love was a waste. That was painful. That was really painful. And then we had another student who said she was so excited. She was just so excited she was going to the museum. She didn't know what to do. And she goes to the American History Museum and she walks in the lobby and what is there but these machines, these old machines. And the actual exhibit was Hooray for Politics. And with everything that was going on through the campaign, the presidential campaign, every day we opened class, we had a discussion. It was rough. And then she said, I'm going to vote. And that's what that exhibit meant to her. And I wish that they were here from the Smithsonian because that really was a resounding comment. They also noticed, one of the students noticed that they thought, they made the connection, school uniforms that the characters in the book may have actually worn in the story and the actual desks that they may have sat in. They'd had a good time with their friends. And the one student said she didn't get a chance to see everything, so she was going back. And I just want to let you know, these students right here are members of the Black Student Union, which I am the sponsor. So I just wanted to show them. Here's some more of my students. They were having a ball, taking pictures. And now here's the piece. Here's the piece. We're down having lunch. The professor just got overwhelmed. I was standing there. I didn't have my fork. Didn't have my cup. I didn't get a napkin. I was a mess. And I was standing in the middle of the cafeteria saying, I don't know what's wrong with me. I'm a mess. And there was a lady standing there and she said to me, that's all right, honey. You're just on sensory overload. And that's exactly what it was. This museum is that emotional and that good. And I never got past the cafeteria. I never got up to the other levels. So I was already on overload. So you can't do it all in one day. Don't even try. And someone said, I'm doing this again soon. These are some of the pieces from their final projects. This young man here is not from this country, and he was one of the students who went back and was telling his parents everything that he had learned, and he came back and told me, he said, Professor, we're going down to the museums during winter break, and I just would love to know whether they got down there. They had a project rubric. It was a reading rubric. I had to make sure that they understood everything they read and when they set up their projects. And I just took some pictures out of the projects that they gave. This particular student here, this one, he chose this drum. He took a picture of it. And this student actually put music to his presentation. Every one of his slides, not only had he taken the object and actually connected it to the story, but he also connected it to his culture, which is Korean. Absolutely phenomenal. This young man loved the book so much, he said to his dad, evidently was telling his dad about the story, and his father said, let's go down to DC, down to Georgetown, and find these spots. And they took a field trip. The whole family got in a car on a Sunday afternoon and drove to Georgetown and figured out where the community was and where the pool, there's a pool, you see pool there? That's where the pool was actually located. It was a segregated pool. The church, there is a church there in Georgetown, which they had read about, which is the oldest African American church in Washington, D.C. And then the young man who had actually said to me with tears in his eyes, that quote, this came from his actual presentation. And my thoughts, again, this was an incredible honor. I know that no one can ever take it from me. It is mine to have and to keep forever. And I'd like to thank Sarah, Mimi, and Denise for just giving us this opportunity. I had the opportunity to work with some of the finest colleagues on Montgomery College's campuses. I hope I have that experience again, but I'm going to miss Thursdays. I'm missing them already, and this will be my last Thursday. But I do want to say this to you. I have taken this experience and I've shared it at my other place. Thank you.